An Empirical Study. Having established the functionality of SFEcon's desktop prototypes, as well as the computability of the hyperbolic utility parameters upon which they are based, we are naturally led to two questions. 1. Can these systems be scaled up to represent actual economic circumstances? And 2. Are hyperbolic descriptions of technical indifference sufficiently stable on the dimension of time to support useful longitudinal modeling? Such questions are, of course, never answered in the positive sense. Rather, we perform experiments that might falsify affirmative responses. Data upon which these experiments might be performed are not easily constructed. National and international statistical agencies do not operate with any special regard for SFEcon's data structures. Most notably, our separation between physical quanta and their prices, our inclusion of household and government sectors within the causal matrix, our parallel systems of physical and financial flows, etc. And the methodologies used by the established agents are not notably consistent year over year. One intrepid SFEcon adherent has managed to essay the applied tacit meta-premise that our scientific speculations are solid enough to one day enter common application. Her work is fully presented at sfecon.com. Links in the show notes will take you to all the details behind the terse summary to be presented here. The study was based on public data from the UK's Office of National Statistics. In 2004, the ONS recast its 11 input-output tables from 1992 to 2002 for the sake of a consistently applied methodology throughout a fairly extensive period. A great many ad hoc operations were then applied to bring these data into accord with SFEcon's input-output structure. Each of these operations required choices among credible alternatives, such that widely varying treatments of the available data would be recognized as faithful embodiments of SFEcon's view on these same material affairs. We aver that these choices, while equivocal, were done with intelligence and with incisive guidance from the UK Office of National Statistics itself. 12 sectors were identified as spanning SFEcon's requisites for cognition of the economic whole. These are showing here. The UK data were fitted into exchange matrices of order 12 by 12. Our software was then used to compute hyperbolic utility parameters U sub ij for each row in the exchange matrix E sub ij. These computations operated under the naive assumption that the physical exchanges E sub ij were optimal with respect to the prices that prevailed in a given year. Utility parameters were organized in matrices U sub ij corresponding to the observed exchange matrices E sub ij. These operations yielded a series of 11 utility matrices, one for each of the 11 years from 1992 through 2002. Focus then shifted to individual cells in the matrix formulation. An 11-year series was extracted from each of the 144 matrix positions, thereby creating a time series for each utility parameter that might be analyzed for its intrinsic temporal consistency. Presentation of the analyses was organized according to a rank ordering of all the cells in the exchange matrices in terms of the amount of activity occurring therein. Cell 0 recorded the most activity over the 11 years examined. Cell 143 recorded the least. Two models of consistency were applied to each of the 144 series. The first was a simple average, testing the premise that utility parameters should be constant. The second was an ordinary least squares regression against time, testing the premise that utility parameters should change monotonically. and r-bar squared was computed for both models as applied to all 144 series. The two r-bar squareds for each series were then tabulated in rank order of the cell's exchange magnitude among all cells. Here we find that useful analyses might be performed on a supposition that technical potential remains constant over a period sufficient to absorb an exogenous stimulus. And, where more acute analyses are required, it seems that naive methods would be adequate to extend historical series of hyperbolic utility parameters into a foreseeable future. While the experimental results presented here are based on what is likely the best data available to the public, their results can be endlessly equivocated on the ground that the necessary initial transformations of the primitive data have legitimate alternatives that were not investigated, or that the time series evaluated are rather short, or that the data are from one nation enmeshed in significant foreign exchange, said nation having a somewhat overbearing public sector, etc., etc. Recall that the meta-hypotheses behind SFEcon are 1. That economic order ensues from a tendency for marginal revenues to approach marginal costs, and 2. That hyperbolic utility parameters adequately measure the economy's underlying technical potential. Observing that these hypotheses have been left standing after their encounter with a reasonable set of formulations on the ONS dataset, we presume that similar encounters are not likely to do much damage.